Welcome, everyone. I wanted to make this video, just put myself out there and talk a little bit about healing grief, working with grief as a gateway to personal power. And this is partly kind of related to the time now, but it is also very general because obviously we go and look for healing when grief, or in most cases, unprocessed grief has come up in some form. But what I often find in both the healing field and the larger, New Age community, or whatever you like to call it, the spiritual community, there is a bit of spiritualization of healing going on. So we see, and that's partly true, saying that, grief is a lower frequency, lower vibrational emotion, or anger, grief, if you are familiar with the levels of consciousness theory, so where death is 0 and God consciousness is 1000. So grief would be just above shame, I believe. So shame, anger, grief, all of these emotions that keep us separate from the divine. And my experience has been, maybe it's not your experience, but it has been my experience that we, especially in the West, we often try to jump over stages of grieving, spiritualize it very soon and say, oh, no, I'm spiritual, I'm not supposed to be grieving, right? I'm spiritual, I'm not supposed to feel anger or shame or greed or guilt or grief. So it's negative. We have to stay positive. We have to look towards the light, and grief is darkness. Well, that's not how it works in my experience. Jumping over grief, our pain body consists of unprocessed emotions, of which the biggest one is ultimately grief. And I can tell you that we feel grief. Of course, there are big griefs when we lose a loved one, when we are displaced, when we are suffering, when death and war and disaster affects us directly. Those are big griefs, and they take time to process. And very often they hide behind small griefs. So if we have a big unprocessed grief, very often what happens is, your pen falls and you start weeping and crying, or you mourn the loss of a pet more than the loss of a parent, for example, or I don't know, you don't make the green light and you have to stop at the red light, and suddenly you start crying and it makes no sense. Then most likely what this indicates is that there is a bigger grief that is hiding and has not been processed yet. And the only way you're able to process it is through those small little griefs. It's much easier to cry over not making a green light than it is to mourn for a loss of a child, for example, or a loss of a parent. But collectively, as a culture, I don't think in the West, or Western-oriented cultures, we don't have a very good mechanism. We don't have collective grievings. Even the funerals are a little bit, most people don't like funerals. Let's start with that. Funerals is something horrible, but we will hide death and we will not approach it, and we will have taboo. We don't talk about people who died. We'll talk about people who have been passed away, gone too soon, etc. And if that is compounded with a spiritual attitude of only looking for positive, 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 love and light, love and light, love and light, have to be happy, 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 happy. Yes, I'm all love and light. I don't know if I mean if you can manage living like that, it's great, but I don't think it's natural. Like in my experience, I mean, look at the world around, and I mean at the natural world, at the planet Earth. Is it unchangeable? Are the animals happy, 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 loving, loving, loving to each other? Doesn't the earth have volcanoes and floods and earthquakes? Don't the animals kill each other? Don't the animals grieve? Don't the animals die? Within our bodies, look at our cells. They die, they renew themselves. And the cells that don't know how to die, for example, cancer cells, are usually the ones that will kill us, not the cells that do know how to die. So I find this approach as a healer a little bit simplistic, but sometimes outright dangerous. Like if you try to always be positive, 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 happy, 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 only visualize the positive outcome. Oh yes, yes, someone died, but I'm going to be positive, positive, positive. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to look towards the light. I'm going to sing and dance. It's an avoidance approach, which might be great because you just can't process everything that happened into your life. So you are building strength by being positive. So it may serve you well for a time, but when you've built strength, there may be time to start processing griefs, big griefs and small griefs, starting with small griefs. And the first step would be to realize, well, it's actually normal. It's normal to grieve when you've moved to a better house. It's normal to grieve when you got a better job. Why is it normal? Well, because the old one, even if it was much worse, it was still a part of you. And even if you lived in a horrible place or a horrible family, a horrible relationship, now it's gone and will never be the same. You will never be the same. You will change. Isn't it worth grieving? At least for 5 minutes. There's nothing wrong with it. It won't kill you to grieve. What may kill you is not to grieve. So I think this approach, like of hyper positive and always love and light, and oh no, God forbid we should allow anger and grief and rage and shame come in. If that is just glossed over, just jumped over, and you just ignore it without actually sitting and grieving and crying and screaming and finding a communal ritual, if at all possible, for grief, then what is going to happen? I mean, that grief is it's going to be there. Worst case scenario, it will hit out in the physical body as a disease, some form of disease, cancer, for example, or other issues that I don't want to oversimplify. There are environmental issues of disease and et cetera, but those unprocessed low emotions, well, if we don't process them, they're not going to go anywhere. Love and light is not going to make the grief go away. What is true is that, yes, we can change our bandwidth. We can go higher up. But it's a little bit of a dance because, as I said, in my experience, it's not natural for there to always be light. Imagine if there were no night and there would only be day. That's the aspiration of humanity, but I don't know how that is going to work out. We're not there yet. When everything has been purified, it may be that there will not be darkness and not be grief, but not everything is purified yet, that's for sure. But imagine if now, in the state that we're in, there is no night. It's just day, 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 bright sunshine all the time. Everything would die because the birds can't go to sleep. Everything, well, up north, they learned to. But if it's also hot, if the sun is blazing and the sun is trying to kill you 24/7, the birds don't go to sleep and the plants don't have the chance to renew, and their life cycles are disrupted, then everything is destroyed and everything is dead. So it's not possible to have light all the time. So we have those cycles, and grief is one of those cycles. And I feel we need to create those rituals for grieving and mourning and take them seriously, because it's very dangerous to just gloss over and say, no, it's love and light and love and light. It may be necessary for a time because you just can't see, you can't feel anything. Feeling numb in the presence of a big grief is normal, especially if you're a sensitive soul or highly sensitive person, an advanced soul. There is just too much. You can't process it and the system shuts down. But it doesn't mean that's the way to go long term. You have to start at least grieving the small things, maybe grieving that the day is over, or that you didn't make the red light. Often grief then expresses as anger, because we don't know as a culture how to process grief. So then we lash out at people, right? We anger. Fear is also expressed as anger. And depending on your personality type, anger can be towards yourself, self-destructive behaviors, or towards others, where you just yell at everyone, right? Your children, your co-workers, like it's everybody's fault. But that's also, it's covering up that unprocessed grief. So we don't have those rituals very often, but the fact that we don't have them doesn't mean that it's true, that it's right, that's the way it should be. So in my experience, we can't always be love and light and happy and spiritual and up. If a tree doesn't have roots and it goes only up, it's going to topple over with the smallest gust of wind, because that's not really how things work. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we always have to sit in grief. That if you don't express it, it can tear you down eventually, because when it comes up and you have no tools to express it and work with it, it will just beat you down. So we go in cycles. We spend time grieving, and then we spend time rejoicing, and there's a time for both. So in healing sessions, like in the healing work that I do, I usually don't work with like the more expressive parts, the processing. It can be very healthy, very helpful. Like, for example, scream into a pillow, right, to express your anger, or have 20 minutes of grieving or 10 minutes of grieving every day. And that could be a great collective ritual as well in a group work, for example. But in the work that I do, and I guess I'm also guilty of, being a little bit too high up energetically, in the work that I do, I tend to work with expanding the bandwidth. So I work with energy work, like pure energy work. So for example, if you connect to your root chakra and you start activating it and really going deeply into the chakra through meditation, very often the first thing that you find is actually fear and grief and anger. And the same applies for, the energy centers in the belly, the tantien or the womb. And then only after processing that and sitting with it, then you can go to build up the power. But guess what? Our power, our Kundalini, is also coiled up at exactly the same place where the grief and the anger is. So if you don't work through grief and anger and just try to open your third eye and be spiritual, guess what happens? So you're a tree without roots, right? You get toppled over. We have many stories of that, like, people trying to open their third eye and going crazy because there is no grounding. They haven't processed griefs. They haven't processed the pain. But the way I do it is more energetic. So I do the energetic work. For example, you may start feeling grief coming up, and then it's good to cry. And then we just do a quantum flip, a quantum switch, where we can receive more energy. But my firm belief is that without connecting to our lower energy centers, we can't really build up our power because it's coiled right there. And another thing is that for many sensitive and advanced souls, you have grief, pain, and lower chakra emotions and energies that are connected to your soul group, the place that you live. So kind of if you are a sensitive soul, you connect more broadly energetically. So you connect with the grief of the land, for example. If you live on a place where there was displacement, or many wars, or people have lost their livelihoods over and over again, it leaves an imprint on the land. You're born there or you chose to live there, which is often the case with sensitive souls. They choose where, give me that dark place to transmute. But then you connect to those frequencies as well. It doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't mean that you have to be crying. It may feel like there is a bottomless well of grief when you are an advanced soul and you've connected to ancestral grief, the grief of the land that you live on or lived on or were born into and now live on. And then you may feel like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to clear it. I'm never going to overcome it. Well, no, you're not. If you just keep clearing it, yes, it's not humanly possible to clear grief for thousands of generations of ancestors and for everyone who lived on the land, and then your soul group and the souls you're connected to, and then the feminine. So if we look at it this way, that we just have to clear, and it never ends. But we dance between this grief and we acknowledge that it's more than just ours. We connect, and the more sensitive we are, the broader we connect. But we also can connect broader above. We can connect. Our roots go deep, but then also our crown goes very high. So we can connect to light, to divine light, and that's the purpose why we connect to those lower, darker, unpleasant things, is to transmute them, is to anchor them, and then transmute them into light. But without connecting with light, of course, it will feel that, you're just forever healing and transmuting and grieving. And oh my goodness, 20 minutes of grief. Yeah, I've been grieving for 20 years. It's not getting any better. So the way I like to work is dancing between these polarities, but we're somewhere in the middle, or we connect with light. Because as an advanced soul, you can also channel the divine. You also channel the divine power. And we have many myths and stories of, like, for example, the grieving goddess Isis, right? She grieves the death of Osiris, but then she's also the one who resurrects him, or the grieving of Mary Magdalene, right? And the resurrection of Jesus. And some would say, well, Mary Magdalene did perform those ancient rites that were meant to bury and then resurrect Osiris, right? Resurrect the God, if you like, or the man connected to the divine. So it's a next level. The rebirth rites that were present in most mystical traditions, like say in Egypt, right? You were supposed to spend a day in the coffin, or however long it was. Like those ancient rites, it was going down in order to ascend. I hope it makes sense in relation to grief and what I was saying earlier about roots and crown, right? Because you can't, without it, it's not possible to ascend, but you're not supposed to stay in the coffin forever. And so that's the method in the healing work as well. It's really entering that quantum field where you become a part of something bigger. And then, yes, grief is there, but it's not all there is. There is a bigger reality that is present. So don't forget to grieve, don't ignore grief, and don't try to always be happy, 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 and positive, positive, positive. It's really not normal. The only cell that grows forever is a cancer cell. Don't don't become a cancer cell. And if you're interested in healing, I'm going to post links below the video as well. I'll have a healing transmission last Saturday of October, also for healing grief and connecting with our personal power. So you can check it out as well if you're interested. So many blessings and much power to you in those challenging times that we're in. And this decade, there's a bit of a transition time for planet Earth. So a lot of challenges are still on the way. So many blessings to you and much, much power. Thank you.